Hi everyone, this is audap. Let's continue our game of Raging Loop, running on the PlayStation 5. It was already evening. As I whiled away the time with some fruitless contemplation, I heard noises outside that brought me back to reality. People were shouting loudly. I opened the window and shouted. It was facing the cliff, so I couldn't shout to the settlement directly. They probably didn't hear me since I didn't get a response. So I shouted even louder. Huh? Was I about to get punched? I can only repeat myself. It was? I didn't get a reply this time. I only heard several voices clamoring. Then I heard someone hurry up the dorm stairs. I got no response again. What was happening here? Someone was definitely close. It just made me more tense. Her voice was cut off by a scream, though it was more like intense cursing. It was Takumi-san's voice, no doubt about it. Chimey left without saying another word. I fought the door, but it showed no sign of opening. Shit. Like hell I was gonna stay out of the loop any longer. Turning around, I went to open the window and decided to try jumping out. Though I was on the second floor, it wasn't too high of a drop. It'd make my legs a little numb, but so what? I jumped out without any hesitation. I properly bent my knee, so I didn't hurt myself at all. Then I ran to the settlement where I'd heard the voices from. I quickly understood the cause of Takumi-san's shouting. They were cries of despair. The reason was somewhere downhill along the way to the graveyard. It was a small grove of low trees with a carpet of leaf mold below. It would have been hard to see even if there was no mist. You could hear running water nearby. I couldn't see where it came from, but it was probably an irrigation channel for the paddy fields. There was a small crowd gathered. I peeked through the space between them. There were bodies. Two of them. One was of an old man, and the other of that child, and the other that of a child. Though their appearances were vastly different, each was in a similar state. They lay on the ground with their hands covering their stomachs, utterly still and covered in blood. These were the corpses of the old man who cried wolf and Chikmochi Kamoshida. There was nothing I could say in response. There were 5 of us on the scene. Chiemi Sarazawa, Takumi Muro, me, as well as Yasunaga Orabe, who was vomiting on a nearby bush, and Rikako Umatsu, who was watching the remains from the distance. Most were proactive, and I could see why they were, but Rikako Umatsu felt a bit out of place. But then I remembered that we were already pretty short-handed. She pointed to the old guy's clothes. There were gatherings of fur all over his garment. A werewolf. If that was the culprit, then this was the work of the corruption. Was that what she was saying? No. This was completely different from how the others had died. The fur proved little.
匠兄ちゃん、落ち着いてよ。
うるせえ。こいつが来てから全部おかしくなったんだ。こいつがいなけりゃ。
It felt like he was about to grab me. I could clearly see the intense emotion whirling in his eyes. I thought I could get him to trust me, but now it was back to square one.
もち、どうしてだよ。どうして。
Yasunaga Odabe calmed down a bit and faced the remains of his dear friend. His voice was shaking. The expression on the corpse was eerily pale and emotionless. Even a look of agony was absent. It almost looked like he was smiling. Did his face muscles simply go limp?
これは汚れじゃない。
どうしてわかる？
どいてくれれば証明できる。
He glared at me with immense hatred before letting me through.
きつい人は見ない方がいい。
I walked up to the old guy's corpse. He looked as distant as always, but the lack of blood flowing in his face simply made his appearance even more creepy. I avoided looking at it while I grabbed his back and rolled him onto it. With a wet sound, entrails spilled from the wound in his stomach.
なんてひどい。
みんな無理するな。匠さん、あなたは見てください。
The stomach was clearly torn open by a blade.
これは超自然的な天罰や何かじゃない。人間が道具を使って作った傷だ。そして凶器が見つからない以上、誰かが意図的に持ち去ったか隠したかしか考えられない。
それをやった誰かが休みずにいて、凶器もどこかに隠されてるってのか。
宴の開始から今に至るまでの流れを詳しく説明してください。
With several people here to tell me, I ended up with a decent grasp of how today's feast went. Kinosuke had suggested they choose who to kill by vote. The wolf guy and Chiemi ended up with the same amount of votes, resulting in a tiebreaker vote. Most ended up voting for the wolf guy, sentencing him to death. He said he'd wanted to take care of some things, so he and Chikmochi Kamoshida went out, while the rest stayed where they were.
本当にその二人以外は外に出なかったんですか？
間違いねえよ。一応は宴はまだ続いてた。ジジイと近持ちが出たのが特別だったんだ。
二人は戻ってくる予定だった。その後宴が再開される予定だった。どう続くはずだったんです？
それはよその方にはちょっと。
いいでしょう。しかし二人はずっと戻ってこなかった。どれくらい待ちました？
1時間は経ってなかったろう。
その後、遅いから心配だってことで僕らが探しに出て、ものの10分もしないうちに見つかりました。
So, the culprit was one of those not present. Chiemi, Takami-san, Yasunugi-kun, and Rikaku Imatsu. The five in the hall, Nasatoshi, Kiori-san, Meiko, Haru-chan, and Tai-san simply couldn't be responsible.
数分で二人を殺害し、返り血などで汚れた服を着替え、再び戻って捜索しているふりをする。
不可能よ、そんなの。
捜索中、互いの姿は？
見ていません。離れて探していましたから。
一旦お堂に戻りましょ
う。We then went out to the hall. Kinosuke kept watch and confirmed that no one beside the victims and the search party had left the building. That limited the potential murderers to the search party and I. I asserted that I was still in the room when it all happened, and they believed me for now, though Takumi-san continued to suspect that I used some sort of trick to escape and commit the murders. Well, that was fair, considering everyone else was with them, but I knew I wasn't the culprit. That left only one possibility.
二人はお堂を出てすぐに死んだ。その後、誰かが凶器を持ち去った。
結局、お前しか考えられねえってわけだ。
だから、私が部屋にいるの聞いたって言ってるじゃん。
そこについては、僕は無実を主張し続けます。である以上、僕は二人の死因は他にあると言うしかない。
さっきから慎重に、殺人と言ってませんね。
気づいた？そう。今のところ、自殺や病死、毒殺の後、死体損壊や凶器持ち去りが行われた可能性はある。
そんなことをして我々に何の得がある？それより芹沢時様が共犯だとなれば、 話は極めて簡単ではないかね。
わかりませんが、僕にだって得はありませんよ。
どうだか。本当はお前たち以前から知り合いだったんじゃないのか。
違いますけど。だったとしてどうだって言うんですか。
気味の悪い昔話を住人が信じているのをいいことに、化け物のふりをして殺人を楽しみに来たなんてのはどうだ。
やめてください。言っていいことと悪いことがあるでしょう。
やめなさい、あんた方。
Tai Yamawaki-san walked out of the hall. I could see Hara Makimishima, Mike, Meiko, and Kiori Oribe behind her. That made a total of 10 survivors, 9 if you excluded me, who hadn't participated in the feast.
誰が近持ちとおじいさんを殺しても、それは掟に反して行われたこと。神内様は必ず汚れをお与えになるわよ。
She put her hands together in prayer and faced the peak of Mount Shinai at the opposite side of the Saranaga. Strangely enough, that was enough for everyone to fall silent. Rikaku Uematsu joined in, and Meiko copied her. This was the settlement's way of solving things. They gave up on discourse and just left it in the hands of a higher power.
ばあちゃん、今日はどうする？
もう一人分の血は流れとる。おじいさんも死んでしもうたことじゃ。宴はしまいにして片しよ
う。わかった。安永、手伝え。
僕が。
お前はおとなしくしてろ。
The situation was only getting worse. Soon after that, it was time to shelter, so everyone retreated to their houses. Takumi-san had entered my room and boarded my window completely shut.
てめえが犯人じゃないなら、完全に塞いでも何かが起きるはずだ。
His words were harsh, but there was a hint of composure. He might have actually believed that I wasn't the one who did it, or maybe he found peace in the idea that the mountain would punish the culprit. Or perhaps he just believed it was the work of something supernatural. Whatever the case, he was dwelling less and less on the matter. Was the wolf guy a wolf? I had no idea whether that was plausible. Assuming he wasn't, 2 of the remaining 9 were wolves. With Kinosuke being a confirmed human, Takumi-san being the snake, and Maiko being a monkey, there were a whole 6 suspects. Thanks to my advice, Jamie suggested the monkeys reveal themselves, and they turned out to be Chikimochi, Kamoshida, and Maiko. Or Meiko, though Mochi had just died. That was a heavy blow. Him being a confirmed non-wolf was one reason, but more than that, he was one of the few people here who actually talked to me without restraint. He was somewhat of an oddity compared to the rest of the people here, but I did find him to be a fun guy. I'd like to get back at whatever injustice has stolen his life. Clearing my head, I resumed thinking. Since she was acting suspicious today, Takumi-san would investigate Hara-chan. Tomorrow, we'd have only 5 suspects. That would give them decent chances of picking out the 2 wolves. It seemed to me like it wouldn't be that hard to find out the murderers, who would surely be shaken by what they had done. And then the outed wolf, not wanting to die alone, would reveal their partner. That was the most optimistic way to look at it. From a pessimistic standpoint, though, the situation was absolutely terrible. 4 people had died today. In a normal feast of the Yomi Purge, it had to be 1 per day, 1 per night. That was double that. If things hadn't gone so well in the forest, even Haru Makishima might have died, not to mention the dreadful state Kiori Oribe was in. I was told their relationship had gotten worse. Kiori-san was in no state to prepare food, so it was likely that no one had eaten anything today. The hunger would only worsen everyone's morale. It was best for them to prioritize getting a proper meal tomorrow. Even so, there was no guarantee we wouldn't get any more irregular deaths. For example, someone at their wit's end could attack a wolf suspect despite the threat of the corruption. If they ended up losing more humans while the number of wolves stayed the same, the humans would be done for either tomorrow or the day after. Escape. I've been entertaining the idea ever since lunch. The path was ruined and I'd have to travel through an undeveloped grove, but I hadn't run into anything supernatural there when searching for Hara-chan. Maybe I could get out as long as I watched where I was going. I also had Saranaga as another option. Everyone here hated it, but that just made it less likely for me to be caught. Going down a misty, rocky cliff was dangerous, but at least it was a one-way road. I just had to be careful I didn't get taken by the currents, as it was definitely better than just staying here and dying. However, perhaps even suggesting that was dangerous. According to Rikaku Uematsu, the effects of the corruption were limited to the one who broke the laws, so you could escape them by killing yourself. However, if someone said they wanted to escape the village, the punishment would likely go to both the one attempting it, as well as the ones who allowed it. The escape would surely become a hell of an experience then. However, there was an optimistic view of the situation. Something was actually here. Something abnormal was here in Yasumizu, killing and menacing its people using abnormal methods. At the very least, Yoshitsugu Orabe, who'd went to face it, suffered a horrible death. The superstitions weren't baseless, and it was best to look at the situation from that angle. My plan of escape contradicted that. But then, how could I prepare for what was to come? The best I could think of was trying to familiarize myself with Fujiyoshi's superstitions. Perhaps I could find some sort of weak point or hint that could lead me to their identity. The action rhyme they did was obviously referring to the Feast of the Yomi Purge. I couldn't remember all the lyrics, but I felt like there was quite a lot of info in there. Perhaps there were more hints for the feast in Yasumizu's culture and general area. I felt I had to talk to Rikaku Uematsu. She was an adult who seemed more involved with Fujiyoshi's prayers and stuff than most. I need to arm myself with more info by tomorrow morning. That, along with the proper progression of the feast, were my only ways to survive. About today's feast. They must have decided to hang the wolf guy because they just didn't care about him at all that much. Simple as that. Sure, it was important to get rid of the participants who weren't cooperative. However, the fact that we'd lost 6 people, but they still hadn't gone beyond he or she is kinda shady was pretty bad. Yesterday, they wouldn't have hung anyone for such a petty reason. Well, the problem was that they hadn't hung anyone at all so far. But then again, it wouldn't be a good thing to give the impression it was okay to kill people just for seeming shady. This place was regressing back to a feudal, superstitious mental state. If there was something that could stop them from sinking there, it would be an outsider like me. I steeled my resolve and waited for the night to pass. I was so startled by the voice on the other side of the door that I momentarily screamed. What time was it? 7? It was too early for an attack and too late to walk around.
どうしたんだ君は。もう寝てないと天罰が下るんじゃないのか。
いやー、多分あと1時間くらいは大丈夫だよ。昨日も8時くらいまでは起きてて何もなかったし。正直毎日寝すぎでしてね。寝は足りてる一方でお腹が空いてどうにもこうにもね。
備蓄は？
香織さんがあんな状況だとみんなで分け合うべきかなって思って手をつけないことにした。みんな今日はお腹空かせてるしね。付き合おうかって思って。
How upstanding.
春明さんは食べていいと思うよ。
昼のやつ？いや、やめとく。ところで何の用？
だから気を紛らわせるために。
本当にそれだけ？
春明さん、私のこと疑ってる？
いや。
なんで？
猿のことを言ったから。自分でちゃんと理解した上で。読み意味の宴は非常によくできたコミュニケーションゲームだ。
よくできたって？
コミュニケーション以外の方法でゲームに勝つことをほとんど封じてるって意味だけど、近持くんも言ってたよ。これに勝つには人も狼もコツというか独自のセオリーを要する。猿もその一つだ。何の役に立つか分かりづらいけど、実はいきなり容疑者を2名も減らせるわけだ。これは1日目から可能だから、猿は安全なリーダーになれる。モッチーとメイコには厳しそうだけど。
そうだね。自由人とお子様じゃな。
一方で狼はどちらかといえば受け身なセオリーになるんだと思う。怪しいだけでくくられる状況下ではあくまで怪しまれないことが重要になるわけだが、これは結構難しい。
そうだね。黙ってても雄弁でも怪しく見える時は見えるし。
そうだね。ただごく初期の段階でも信用と不信を分ける2つの要素がある。
それが 猿のことに関係するの？
ああ、要は間違った誘導をすることと有用な提言をしないことだ。間違った誘導については、例えば間違った計算でみんなを煙に巻いた清之助氏あたりは結構怪しい。
でも彼は人確定でしょ？
その通り。まあ匠さんがヘビってのが嘘じゃないって仮定の上の話だけど。
え、嘘だって可能性あるの？
ゼロじゃないさ。だって加護を受けたかどうかなんて口ではいくらでも言える。というか、例えば僕が狼なら何人か殺した後で適当な加護者を名乗って安全な座席を確保するね。
なるほど。でも匠兄ちゃんは初日にいきなり名乗ったよ。
そうなんだよな。自殺行為に近いけど、結果雲に守られることを考えれば痛みを伴う有効打だったのかな。ともかく確かにそうなると匠さんと清之助氏は信頼していいと思う。さらに僕の中では猿の使い方についてちゃんと発信した。君もね。
春明さんのその意図を見抜いて黙ってるのを諦めたのかもよ。
おお、それは困るな。
ということは猿のことを教えてくれた時点では千恵美のこと疑ってたってことですよな。
あ、気づいた。
なんつう男、好感度だ。
信じたかったからカマかけたんだよ。
回復。
Woohoo!
ということは一番怪しいのは誰？
はるちゃん。
やっぱりか。
さすがにちょっと説明になってないし、2日目で態度が変わった理由も実の祖父を殺したからで説明できる。あるいは他の狼の肝臓師を殺す決定に同意できず誰も信用できなくなったとかね。
ああ、確かにありそう。
You could make up a thousand reasons like this, though. We couldn't just go by that. They said Haru hadn't gathered many votes, but they treated her like some kind of pariah, making it clear that everyone suspected her. It was only natural to use the snake to check on her.
まあ彼女はそんなにゲームとか得意じゃなさそうだから有用な提言をしないの原則で判断するのはかわいそうだけど、それで言うなら安永くんの方がもっと怪しい。
え？でもヤスくんいっぱいいろいろ言ったよ。日数計算が間違ってることとか、それに今春明さんが言ったようなことも言ってた。何もしないのが間接的に狼を利しているだっけ。それに初日雲が隠れてた方がいいってことも。
そうなんだよね。
Though most of those things were minor, he was definitely contributing to the game. The first day was essentially important. For the wolves, it was best to create a flow where they could just stay quiet and wait for those with guardians to out themselves. What bothered me was the fact that he wasn't the one who brought up leader selection and the monkey thing. He was shady because he hadn't made those useful propositions. I thought he'd figured these things out a while ago. Or maybe I, as an outsider, just had a better grasp of the situation.
となると彼はやっぱり白かな。あとはわからないね。植松里香子さんやタエさんは何考えてるかわからないし。
そうだね。
But if you looked at the circumstances outside of the feast, Rikako Uematsu was pretty shady. It almost felt like she was hinting at something. It wouldn't have surprised me if she knew more than she let on. If she was a village head, she could know things only those from Kamafujiyoshi knew. There was more than enough reason to suspect her. If only we could follow that lead and solve this whole thing, it'd make things way easier.
春明さんさ、現状を楽しんでない？
ないよ。
でもこういうミステリーみたいなのって好きそう。
それは否定しないけど、さすがに自分や大事な人の命がかかっている時に楽しむ気分にはなれないな。それこそ探偵を気取ってみても素人には何も分かりはしない。無力感だけさ。
あんまりそうは見えないな。
なぜこんなに疑われているのだろ
う。他のみんなボロボロだよ。普通の人はああやって平常心を失っていくもんだと思う。
それは君についても言えるんじゃない？
私も普通じゃないですし。
そういえば人を殺しかけたとか聞いたけど。
誰かな、バラしたのは。
それは秘密。まあ そんなに悪意のある感じには聞こえなかったけど。
まあなんと言いますか、中学の時かな、安水の子らをいじめてた分校の上級生らをバットでボッコボッコ。
うわ。
その中に長者の筋のやつもいたから大騒ぎになっちゃってね。まあそれで年が上の人たちは私に厳しいんだ。
なるほど。正義の武闘派ってわけだ。
So she was sent to Yasumizu for making enemies out of the village heads.
いやー、まあ単に血の気が多くて問題を起こしたかっただけですよ。
反抗期？
そんな感じ。はるちゃんやよしくんと同じよ。こんな田舎だとやすくんみたいにまっすぐ育つ方が珍しいんじゃない？
そうかな。ひねた都会よりも健全で素直な子に育ちそうだけど。
言い直す。こんなに貧しいとだわ。
Well, there's no doubt about that. Yasumizu was destitute. There were no cars, cell phones, and it didn't even feel like it had an economy. They probably lived mostly off the land, making money from whatever they could spare from their farms and hunts. Since they had no decent way to sell stuff to anyone outside, most of their business had to be done through Kamafujiyoshi. It was entirely likely they were ripping them off. No way this place could be wealthy in these circumstances. I didn't believe that money could buy everything, but poverty took its toll on the people suffering it. Some could live in poverty while retaining their purity, but that was borderline saintly. It was a lifestyle too difficult for the common masses. Also, since the people of Yasumizu were ostracized from Kamafujiyoshi, they were targets of unjust pressure from day one. I can understand why the children here strayed from the path. Though when you looked at it like that, the way they strayed was so mild it was almost cute.
今度こそ引いた？
いや、別に。
嘘だ。いざとなったらドンキ持ち出すような女、内心ドン引きでしょ？ドンキだけに。
I'm just going to ignore that poor attempt at a pun. Sorry.
前の彼女もそんなだったし。
お、へえ、そうなんだ。
なぜか動揺されてしまった。
彼女さんと別れたって実は？
嘘だと思われてたのか。
正直ナンパの口実かと。
ひって、それはもう身の危険を感じるレベルの大喧嘩を経て破局しましたよ。
うはー、それはご愁傷様。
君の方は？
え？
男性遍歴。僕は言ったんだから君も言うべきじゃない？
まあその。
実際に付き合ったのは何人なんですか
？2人かな。
ちえねえはモテモテで53人切りの超絶ビッチだって話はどこへ行った？
そこまで言ってない。多少持ったのは認めるが、実際大学で各種お誘いはいっぱいもらってますけども。
なのに二人ぽっちなんだ。付き合った人。
まああんまり会う人っていなくてさ。
僕は？
これ以上やめとこうよ。期待したら死ぬのが怖くなる。
死ぬのが怖いのは当然じゃない？
別に。
どうして？
死ぬより神様の方が怖い。
君の言う神様は一般にイメージするそれと違うよね。
どこが？
それは何やら恐ろしいもので実際に会えるものなんだろ
う？みんな神様には会ってるよ。見えていないのかもしれないけど。それに神様は怖いよ。みんな怖さを知らないだけ。
僕も見えてない、知らないだけ。
あなただけはわからない。だから私はあなたを失うのは怖いかもしれない。
そんな言葉、永遠の愛を誓った相手にでも言えばいい。
怒った？
ちょっとね。
そっか。
この段になっても思わせぶりなだけで何の手の内も開示しないのは火遊びが過ぎるんじゃないの？
私もどうすればいいのかわからないし迷ってるんだよ。
全部話してみればいい。
もう帰るね。
ちえみ、
おやすみ。
What the hell? Why didn't she talk? Did she still not trust me? Was she messing with me? Was she just kind of crazy? Or was it something else? Crap, I wanted to chase her down and get a real answer out of her, but I was locked in. This was so frustrating. Though this wasn't a time to worry about that. Who would the wolves go for tonight? The wolf guy was dead, meaning there was one less person who'd vote Jamie out tomorrow. It wasn't likely she'd get the top vote. It was best to think that the wolves would go for someone who was useful to the humans and couldn't be killed by with votes. That means she and Yasunaga-kun were the ones at highest risk. On the other hand, their survival would make things difficult in other ways. I'd probably be forced to consider the possibility that they themselves were wolves. Could I really trust Jamie? I felt I could, but not completely. Whatever the case, a situation where the more talkative ones were seen as suspicious would make it harder for her to survive. Should I have talked to her about running away? No, that was probably pointless. I didn't know much about her whole god thing, but it was clear that escape wasn't even an option for her. Something scary that everyone had met, yet not fully perceivable. Was she speaking figuratively? Or could she literally see something?
くそ、知るか。
I became irritated. My hunger was starting to get to me. Figuring it was better than just wasting my mental energy, so I focused on taking a bath and going to bed. I had no idea just how naive my predictions would prove to be. 5:15 Thursday. I woke up at 5 in the morning. The window was still boarded up, so I couldn't see anything outside. All I could do was sit around and wait. Eventually, I could hear the object keeping me in getting removed as I was greeted by Yasunaga Odabe and Chiemi Setazawa. The two actually survived. I met up with Hara Makishima, too. Her face was pale and she had bags under her eyes. No one here looked healthy anymore, but she was even beyond that point. She'd gone completely meek, too. The defiance from yesterday was gone, and she was just letting Yasunaga-kun guide her. She'd lost another friend, after all. We arrived at the dining hall, but found no one there. The door was unlocked. That was a bad sign. It was Kanzo Makishima's place all over again.
母は上の階で寝ているはずです。
With that knowledge, I opened the door. What if she was attacked? Even if she wasn't, considering her state yesterday, it wasn't likely she did something unthinkable, such as suicide. However, I soon found out my worries were for nothing. Kyoto-san was standing all alone in the dark dining hall, wearing an apron. The fact that she wasn't doing anything but standing there was just eerie.
あら、おはよ
She turned around and greeted us. Her voice was the only thing calm about her. Her eyes were bloodshot and signs of malnourishment were all across her face. Her faint, forced smile made her seem on the verge of collapse. She completely failed at acting normal. Her heart was probably swirling with panic and sorrow as great as yesterday. Everyone here could see it.
母さん、今日はみんなに食事を出すけど、僕がやるから。母さんは休んでて。
いいのに。
あ、私もやります。これでも自炊はそれなりにしてましたから。
After they volunteered to support Kyoto-san, I thought about what purpose I could serve here.
行こ
And called to Hara-chan before going outside. She came with me, but wasn't saying a word. During yesterday's feast, she had a fight with Kyoto-san. The woman had voted for Hara-chan due to the change in her attitude and failed escape attempt, and I couldn't blame her for that. Considering her personality, I imagined that the exchange had been extremely intense. That was why getting her out of the dining hall was a good move. Problem was, we didn't really have anything to talk about. This was made worse by the hostility she'd shown me until just recently. According to Mochi, that was a product of her affection towards Yasunaga-kun and all the drama surrounding him. Normally, I'd playfully give her a hard time about that kind of thing, but it seemed in poor taste considering the situation. She was staring daggers at me. Maybe I just had to ask her?
う。牧島春さん、
何ですか？
単刀直入に聞くが、君は狼か？
違うわよ。
She didn't hesitate at all. Not like that meant anything.
何よ、納得いかないの？じゃあ、匠兄に調べてもらうわよ。それではっきりするでしょ？
気づいて言ってるのか？
は？何を？
彼が生きていれば食堂で香織さんを介抱してるのは彼だったはずだ。昨日も彼は起きてすぐ食堂に行っていた。香織さんが弱っている今、そうすべき理由はさらに強まった。でも彼はいない。
嘘でしょ。そんなこと。
それを今から調べに行くから案内して。
分かった。タイバー、起きてる
Hana knocked on the door and tried to open it, but it was locked, meaning it wasn't touched. Tai-san came out sooner than later. She looked pretty displeased to begin with, but upon seeing me, she displayed outright disgust.
どうしてあんたが来なさったね。
すみません。香織さんの具合が悪くて人手が足りず。
匠はどうしたね。
今から見に行きます。
そうね。
Her gloomy expression told me she'd realized what might have happened. She said she had to prepare, so we excused ourselves.
必要なものがあったら言ってくださいね。
はい、はい、はい。
She shut the door on us.
女なら誰にでも優しいんですね。
What the hell was she saying?
お年寄りと女性を思いやるのが紳士ってものだろ。
知恵姉もそうなの？
彼女にはそれなりに好意を持ってる。
やめてよ。兄ちゃんがかわいそう。
Ni-chan? Yasunaga-kun? Surely.
かわいそうとは？
よし君ももっちも死んじゃって、兄ちゃんには香織さんと知恵姉しかいないのよ。それに知恵姉は私らの中で一番強くて、上藤吉のやつらや大人たちからいつも私らを守ってくれた。私らから知恵姉を取らないでよ。
So that's how it was. I wasn't sure how she actually felt about Jamie, but there was definitely more trust and reliance than I'd expected. Yasunaga-kun spoke like he'd given up on Jamie, but deep down he was actually glad she had returned. Hada-chan was aware of that, and she actually liked Jamie. That was why she concluded that they should be together. However, it was clear she didn't feel like giving them her blessing.
君の気持ちは分かったよ。
The end result depended on Jamie, and since she hated Yasumizu, I felt like it wouldn't be something Hada-chan wanted. Then again, I really don't know what's going on in Jamie's head either, and I had no idea who'd survived, so making predictions was a waste of time.
とにかく今は宴を終わらせるという一点に集中すべきだ。僕には大したことができないかもしれないが、身内に話しづらいことでもあれば相談には乗るよ。
何それ？
いや、何ってこともないけど、君は悩みが多そうだし、あと外に逃げるって選択、僕はまだありだと思ってるから。
それは無理よ。
ん？君は可能性にかけて逃げたんじゃないのかい？
でも逃げられなかったじゃない。だから分かった。逃げるなんてできないのよ。
それはたまたま怪我をしたからじゃ。
たまたまなんかじゃない。
君も神様を信じてるのか？
何を聞いた？そんなものいない。そう考えなきゃやってられない。
There was a weird aura around her for a second, but then she walked away, leaving me no choice but to follow her. We arrived at the houses. The mysterious girl was on the verge of crying.
おはよう。どうしたの？
はっきり喋りなさいよ。喋れるでしょ、あんた。
大人げないな。はい、おはようございます。
This was hopeless. Hada-chan glared at her while I stayed patient.
リカ子さんは？
お姉ちゃん。
うん。どこ？
出てこない。
ここよ、あいつの家。
It really was. I'd been here yesterday. I knocked and called out to her. There was no response. Hada-chan and I looked at each other, and I tried opening the door. Huh? It was locked.
リカ子さん。
Still no response. I hesitantly put my ear against the door. I heard some sort of rustling sound.
多分着替え中か何かだろう。
じゃあやっぱり。
まだわからない。まだ清之助しかもしれない。
私がどうしたと？
Well, I did expect him to live.
リカ子さんは大丈夫かね？
あなたはそればっかりですね。一応大丈夫そうですよ。まだ出てきてないですが、どうかしたんですか？
嫌な予感がしてな。杞憂ならいい。しかしそうなると、死んだのは山脇老人か？
タイバーは生きてた。
なんだと？
Why was he so positive?
はるちゃんはメイコを連れて食堂へ。清之助さん、手を貸してください。
He tried to say something but decided against it. He must have realized what happened to the one who'd usually be given these annoying jobs. As expected, the door to his house was unlocked, and the reek of fresh blood was so strong you could smell it outside. I thought that was enough to help me prepare. But once I saw the source, I couldn't keep down what few contents my stomach had left. The two from the first day, Kanzo Makishima and Yoshitsu Orbe, they lost all semblance of form to the point their corpses felt unrealistic. On the other hand, Chikmochi Kamoshida and the old wolf guy's corpses were far too clean, their faces still intact after all. However, Takumi Murosan's corpse was an even balance between ruined and intact. He was spread out on the floor, surrounded by splashes and splotches of blood, as well as some bloody footprints. Scattered brain, gray matter, bone fragments, eyes. About 60% of his face was gone. This time, the method was clear. There was a rifle lying next to his corpse. The weapon was actually on the scene for once, and it was a gun. What did that mean? I wanted to talk about that, but I was too shaken by the clear agony Takumi-san's death had brought him. You could see his suffering on the still present half of his face. His hands were on his head, too, as if to cover his face, or reach for the clearly fatal wound. He died while holding on to his shattered brain. Though fatal, the first attack hadn't killed him instantly. He could still move after it, which was a testament to his strength and willpower. His life had ended as he suffered overwhelming despair. It was written all too clearly on his death visage. My emotions bubbled and overwhelmed my thoughts, and I vomited once again.
大丈夫かね?
Kinosuke asked, clearly avoiding looking at it himself.
誰か銃の扱いがわかる人を連れてきてください。
I never expected you to come along. Her expression was too stern and serious for me to even say that.
匠兄ちゃん。くそ。
She cursed and looked at the gun.
これ、肝臓じいちゃんのライフル。
She grasped its long body and picked it up.
5発全弾撃ち切ってる。空薬莢落ちてる？
探す。
I found them real quick. They were covered in blood and flesh, but yeah, I found the metallic cylinders, 5 of them. They were 2 meters away from the corpse, very close to one another. Either the culprit fired from there or gathered them afterwards.
見て、握りの部分。
Jamie extended the rifle to me. I did as told. Compared to the rest of the gun, which had blood on every part, the handle was clean, like it had been wiped.
指紋を拭き取った。
かもね。
Jamie then held it like she was about to shoot and aimed at Takumi-san's body.
ここから撃ってる。
どうしてわかる？
血の飛び散り方。あっちに向かって勢いよく飛んでるでしょ。かなり低い角度で撃った証拠。それに普通のライフルはかなり至近距離でもないとこういう風にめちゃめちゃな傷にはならない。かといって銃口を押し付けて撃ったらいろんなものが跳ね返って銃口がもっと汚れてるはず。
And that was why it was natural to think it had been fired from where she was standing, near the cartridges.
狙って当たるもの？
ちゃんと狙い方を知っていることと対象が動いていないこと。これが揃えば大丈夫。
ということは銃が使えるものの。
ちなみに小銃から小生を除く。それだけ。銃って誰でも簡単に人を殺せる便利な道具なんだよ。
弾の装填とかはその辺の一般人に渡してすぐにできるとは思えない。
それはそうかもね。でもタイバーちゃんあたりなら撃ったことあるだろうし、Yasumizu内で選別は無理かな。
This was a settlement where people went hunting. Basically, everyone here must have touched rifles before. All we could really assume was that Maiko-chan couldn't have done this.
そもそも全弾命中してるわけじゃない。どうやら一発は耳に、
2発は胸と肩に。あ、ここにも弾痕。
She pointed at a small part of the floor that was ruined.
頭部に当たったのは一発だけか。
そうだね。もしかしたらそれは致命傷じゃなくて胸の一発がとどめだったのかも。
She looked at the body's pose and made the same conclusion as me.
ちなみになんでそんなに詳しいの？
私も狩猟免許持ってる。銃も罠も網も全部使える。外ではクレー射撃何度も行ったし、それなりに慣れてるよ。
なんとすごいな。意外な一面だ。
まあね。
いずれ戻ってここで漁師になるつもりだったの？
銃を持ちたかった。それだけ。
She said that as if it wasn't no big deal. Her tone seemed kind of dangerous.
ええ。まあ、人を殺しかけたりとか。
中学の時かな。安水の子らをいじめてた分校の上級生らをバットでボッコボッコ。
It was the impression you'd get from a girl capable of random acts of violence. I was probably jumping to conclusions, though.
もう片付けてもいいかな？
春明さんがいいなら。
じゃあ片付ける。
何か分かった？
一連の殺人が人間の犯行だってことに確信を持っただけ。
The culprit used a gun and wiped out the fingerprints, acts that demonstrated a very human level of cunning. If we were up against something supernatural, they'd just use the mysterious powers instead. If something mysterious can be explained using mundane means, then it was caused by mundane means. That was a general rule I lived by, proven through both knowledge and first-hand experience. Supernatural powers that required carrying out occult rituals were prime examples of things it applied to. The more detailed the preparation required, the more opportunities to notice something amiss. If the trick relied on concealing the method, it was safe to assume the method was something mundane. Even this death wasn't caused by some kind of supernatural force. It just happened unobserved. We had people who could do it, and the methods that fit. That was the best way to look at it, right?
そうかもね。
認めるんだ。
多分殺してるのは私の知ってる誰かと誰か。紛れもない人と思うよ。
でもそれは。
Didn't that go against her whole God story? I wanted to ask, but seeing her eyes made me fall silent. Her eyes were wide and cloudy.
でもね。
Her lips let out clear words.
神様からは。
I looked away. I wanted to cover my ears, too.
誰も逃げられないんだよね。
I found her words so irrational it began to frighten me. Alright, why don't we stop it there? This is audapostrophe. You've been watching Raging Loop running on the PlayStation 5. Although, yes, it is a PlayStation 4 title. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed watching. I will see you with the next stream.